Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Fernando. I'm the moderator for today's interview with another great candidate we have here for our GMAT Club Saturday debriefs. As you join, I would like to thank you once again for all the audience, for all the support, for watching us and sending all of your questions to these great people that come here to share with us their insights, how they navigated this tough, very tough journey, by the way, that we know is the path to applying to a master's, to a top master's program. And today we have a very special person here with us. I'm gonna read a quick intro about him so you can all get like your questions coming up. And even before that, once again, please feel completely free to send your questions here in the chat. We're gonna ask them as the chat goes through with Randeep. And also remember, if you can, to subscribe to the channel and to like this video because it helps GMAT Club a lot to keep bringing these great people to share their insights with we all. So for today, we know that among the top business schools in the world, Stanford GSB is the most competitive and usually one of the schools to where the world's top talents apply to. And just to give some numbers about that, roughly only one out of 11 highly talented individuals are accepted by Stanford. So it's a pretty low admittance rate. And you probably must be wondering who are all these admitted individuals? We always, I think, ask ourselves, are they super performers? Are they equipped with some extraordinary skills? Or are they actually regular people who do regular work but with extraordinary passion and discipline? So today we're talking to an Indian origin US military officer who dreamed of getting his MBA from one of the greatest business schools in the world. He worked hard on his GMAT to earn a respectable 710 score. I wouldn't even call it respectable, a great score indeed, but made a clever switch to the GRE, knowing where his strengths were lying. He studied hard while on active military duty to score 334 out of 340 on the jury. He showed similar passion and commitment while approaching applications, doing a very rigorous introspection on questions as why we needed an MBA, where he saw himself in the future, and why Stanford really would fit in these thoughts. Finally, he made his way to Stanford GSB. So, ladies and gentlemen, please let's welcome Mr. Randeep Singh to our show here. And now I have to add him to the stage. Just 1 second. I did it. Hey, Randeep, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much, Fernando, for the great introduction, and happy to be here. And GMAT Club has been pivotal to my preparation and getting me to where I am now. So happy to share my experience with everyone throughout the world.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I do feel we are missing, one like a background sound of applauses at the end of these introductions. Like, like I need to get one of those for the next sessions. But thank you so much once again, Randeep, for being here and sharing your knowledge, your tips and tricks with us. So, besides this quick intro, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, like about your background, about where you stand right now in this process, and what's on your head?
Sure. So right now I'm in Alexandria, Virginia, waiting to finish up my time in the Army. So I'll be separating from the Army in the next 2 months. And then I am headed to Stanford Business School in the fall this year. I'm looking for some MBA internships in the summer just to kind of build some skill sets in the private sector prior to going to business school. So I can start with a quick background, like in the past, what I've done. So I grew up in India. I was born in the US, grew up in India in New Delhi, and did all of my schooling there. returned to the US for college. So I studied nuclear engineering in college at RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And after the nuclear engineering degree, I worked at General Electric. So I worked at General Electric at their nuclear division for about 2 years. And then I went to grad school to Carnegie Mellon for mechanical engineering. And so most of my background up to that point was energy, and I was very passionate about clean energy and nuclear and carbon capture, and all these things were of great interest to me. But along the way, because I had lived in India and also in the US, I was kind of in this place of I want to establish some roots in the country wherever I'm going to live. And the US had been, great to me. Someone who had not even lived here as a child. I came back, got scholarships, saw the opportunities that were here. And so I wanted to serve. So I ended up joining the Army, and I have been in the Army now for 11 years. I'm a special forces medic, so not an officer, enlisted. So I know some people may be enlisted, and so a shout out to all the enlisted people, because usually that's not a path for enlisted folks. Usually it's the officers that are going into business school. And so while I've been in the Army, it's been a great experience. I was deployed a few times to the Middle East, and that gave me a number of perspectives about energy in developing economies. And so as I kind of come to the end of my Army career, I was introspecting on like what I wanted to do with my career moving forward. And so that's kind of how this idea of going to business school came about. I wanted to do something in energy at a strategic level and kind of use the skills that I had developed previously, and then also add the overlay of the leadership skills I had had in the Army. And so I started the process in 2022, and now I'm here after a couple of years of work.
That's an amazing journey. And one thing that I would like to ask you, Randeep, even because here at Darden, some of my coaches come from the military as well, and I know this is something they struggled a bit with. So what was the moment that you decided, like, this is the right moment for me to make this career pivot? Because sometimes we know, and it happens to we are kind of comfortable in our career. So many people keep pushing this. So what was the moment when you said, no, this is it. Now I'm going to start studying and going for an MBA?
I think for me, the moment was almost all the transitions when I look back are when I'm feeling like I'm not growing or learning new things. And so for me, it was a feeling of stagnation and also kind of projecting forward and saying, would I be happy doing things that I'm doing now 5 years down the road? And would it close certain doors and options for me? And that's kind of where I got this urgency to change my situation. So I think there's a fear to change the situation. I had kind of dealt with that when I had immigrated to the US when I was 17, and I had dealt with that when I joined the Army. And you're right, like it's very difficult. You can always keep postponing it because it's like it's comfortable, and then the long term is probably bad for you, but it's comfortable at the moment. And so for me, that moment came where I had kind of seen most parts of the Army that I wanted to be in. Like I had gone through selection processes, done the deployments, and kind of now it was about kind of a stability. And maybe that's what I was not happy about, because it was too stable and it was not challenging me enough. And so around 2022 is when I said, what are the best ways for me to make the greatest impact in the energy sector or whichever sector? And the answer to me was, I've been out of the private sector for a while now. And because of that, I thought that having the 2 years in business school and building this new network and getting these insights from folks would be a great way to come back into the private sector.
Yeah, that absolutely makes a lot of sense. And once you decided, Randeep, that you were going for the MBA, you were going to start studying for the standardized tests that all of us have to take for that. How did you go about that decision? So before, in the middle of the way, we're going to talk about that as well, your transition from GMAT to GRE. So right when you were about to start, how did you go about that? Did you take a few mock tests, or did you go straight for the GMAT, GRE? How was the start of your study journey?
Okay, so I would say around like July of 2022, I started to look at which schools would I be interested in, and I started to see what do I need to have. And so what I found was that Columbia Business School had early decision at the time. And because I went to undergrad in upstate New York, Columbia had a strong program, and it's in New York City. So I was like, this is going to give me great exposure. So I was kind of, first I committed to Columbia Business School early decision, and then look at the stats of what they had. And what I realized is I had to take the GMAT. I had done the GRE before for the master's program. So I had some familiarity with that. So I was like, let's do the GMAT and see how that is. So around August, I ended up getting a official, I read a bunch, and I realized that official tests are like the way to go. Don't worry about, a lot of the tips were, don't worry about like some of the test prep materials, maybe use them to learn the concepts, but like the official tests are the most important. So my first step was to get an official exam from GMAT, and I took it like completely cold in August, and I wanted to see what my score was. And then from there, I started to come up with a study plan. So I got like a 630 on the very first test, and I was like, okay, Columbia's average is 720 to 730. What are the breakdowns of the quant and the verbal? And now where am I at? And now what kind of work do I need to do?
Perfect. And it's that moment right when you are, I remember that you take that first mock test, and deep inside you, you hope like, maybe I will just crush it so I won't have to study as much. No, who knows? Then the score comes. It's not like the score you wanted it to be, and you are like, okay, so now what's the next step? And going from that, Randeep, so you got this score on your mock test. How did you structure your study plan? So you had this view that you would have to increase, you would like to increase your GMAT score by around 100 points at least. So how did you go about it? How did you craft this study plan?
So when I took that first test, what was really promising was that I had been in a field that, you know, like as a special forces soldier, I'm not doing math or like doing any kind of like sentence corrections and things like that. So the first thing was like, well, I definitely can improve, because like as an engineer, I kind of felt very rusty on some of the math skills. So my take initially was, let me get my quant back up. Because like when I saw the material, I was like, I can get a Q50 or a Q49 on this. Like that was my first approach. I think I got a Q40 on the first one, and like a verbal 32, whatever. It ended up being like a 630. And I was like, well, verbal we'll work on, but let's start with the Q portion of it. And I enjoyed the math anyway. And I was like, this should be a pretty quick gain. So my first thing was I went back and I didn't buy any test prep, but I actually started going to GMAT Club, and they had all these question banks on the GMAT Club. And I just started to look at the solution sets of like the concepts that I had gotten wrong in that mock. So I ended up thinking to myself, I need a Q50 and a verbal 40. That was my goal. So I established this goal, and I was like, let's start with the Q part, the quantitative part, and then I'll go to the verbal. And I also realized that I would probably need to spend like 10 to 15 hours a week. And I was starting early. So I was in August. So I was like, let's take this test in November, November timeframe. And from what I had seen was most people were studying like 3 months. And so I kind of gave myself 10 to 12 hours a week to ramp up to October.
And one thing that I know ends up being very complicated to people who are still working while studying, Randeep, for the GMAT, which I believe it's the rule. So it's to try to just conciliate, to be able to study and at the same time to keep delivering at work. So I can imagine it was even more demanding for you as a military on active duty. Did I say it correctly?
No,
active duty.
No, you got it right. Yeah, active duty. Yep.
Active duty. See, some words I still like. Even living here in the US for almost 2 years now, it's like rural. Like, you know, some words are really tough to pronounce. Anyway, like, so how did you manage to just like reconcile all of this, to be able to keep working and like giving your best self to this study phase because you wanted to reach that goal of increasing your score?
Yeah, I think one was like I'm married, so like I had a conversation with my wife, and she was very supportive about that. So I kind of made it clear, like, hey, this is like one part of the application which I can control. I can control the essays, I can control the score, but like how they read it, that's not on me. But this stuff, like I can't control, and like I have some time, it's going to take this much. So I was very open about it with her. It was actually hard as it went on and on. But that was the first step to kind of like get other people who were going to support me through this journey on board with it. I also let my in the Army, they knew I was leaving. Like I kind of, because in the Army they're contracts, so like I made it very clear to my bosses as well that I'll be like, looking at colleges and things like that. So they were very supportive too. So those open conversations kind of helped me create a more stable schedule at work and at home. Where what I was initially doing was I was saying, well, Saturday and Sunday are going to be my mock test days because they take a long time. So I was doing like 3 to 4 hours at least on the Saturday, Sunday weekend. So I was like 8 to 10 hours were like already like booked on Saturday, Sunday. And like I had control over that. And on the work day, I would try to get like a 1 hour. It was almost like a workout. It was like I have to do a 1 hour workout during the weekdays. And so it was like non-negotiable in a way. I kind of made myself accountable to say like, did you do your 1 hour? And so I kept the small goal initially. And then from there, it ramped up.
So you would say that two essential points for people who are starting their journeys right now, one would be to aligning with their support network, that they are doing that and having those people by their side, and two, establishing these goals that they must hit for themselves, right?
Yep. And I know that in the private sector, you may not have the ability to talk to your boss and be like, hey, this is something I'm doing. So it's, in a way, I think that it's a little harder on the private sector because like then they know that you're leaving. In the military, it was a little easier in that regard. Yeah.
Nice. No, that sounds perfect. And it makes a lot of sense for me as well, having moved here with my wife and our 2 dogs. The support from her was very essential, even because I don't know if you went through that, Randeep. So being very well established in a career, many people just ask you, but really? You're going just to throw it all away and start something new? So did you have to hear this kind of stuff?
Oh yeah, definitely. And I mean, it was very much similar to that. It's like you can retire because in the military, it's 20 years retirement and all that. So yeah, that was definitely a thing. And I think that's in all cases, right? Like most people want to do the status quo and they can't understand why someone would want to disrupt their normal life.
Exactly. And so coming from this work perspective, Randeep, so you said you worked for 11 years at the military. So do you believe that having worked more years than the average applicant for business schools helped you in this piece of not only the GMAT itself that we're talking about right now, but in applying because you were more maybe conscious about your strengths or weaknesses? Or what was your thought regarding that specific factor?
Yeah, I remember like kind of counting the months, in all those business school applications. And I was like 14 years almost of like total experience with internships and everything. And it was like 170 months, 160 some months. But like, it was, I would say like the biggest thing with getting more experience is that to your point, I think you know yourself a little better. So you're not chasing the ranking necessarily or like what's the cool thing now. I think it makes you a little more self-confident to kind of be like, this is the kind of stuff I want to do, and it's harder to get swayed. So I think it helped me a lot during the interviews because once I kind of introspected, I was confident what I wanted to do, and it projected as confident, like because I wasn't making it up for anyone. And I think the other part was like when people say like, can you give me a vignette of like when you provided feedback, when you had this, like all those behavioral type questions, I had a lot more years to kind of pull this out of and had more responsibility over the years because it takes time to get that responsibility. So I think once the GMAT part was done, having that extra experience was definitely an advantage. But also it was scary because it's like they usually take people with 5 to 6 years experience. Am I too old now to get into one of these programs?
And we are definitely going back later in the conversation to this introspection aspect, because I believe it's very important to talk to people watching us about it. And just before we go there, Randeep. So there is one question that we got here from Cabo, and he's asking, thank you, Cabo, for the question. Please, everyone, feel free to keep sending all of those our way. So he asked you, when does it make sense timing-wise to make the switch from GMAT to GRE? So when did you decide doing that?
So I'll tell you, so I ended up taking the GMAT and the GRE in November. So I started my prep in August time for mid-August. I was working on both of them together. So like at about a month, I initially started taking both. My plan was to take both of them one time and see like how I would perform. GMAT is of course a computer adaptive test. I didn't quite like that. It just hurried me up or caused some changes. So I already knew that about myself, that it's not showing the skill set, because I was taking untimed GMATs initially to see like what is my potential. And I would be, by the time I took the first GMAT, I was getting 740 on the GMAT, 730, 740 and untimed. But timed, I was about 710, 720 range. And the GRE, I was not putting as much effort, because what I found was the GMAT was a harder test. Just from the curriculum standpoint, the quant in GMAT was harder than the GRE. The verbal in the GRE, if you just read, I think the GRE is better in that sense, because I read quite a bit. So it didn't have the sentence corrections and grammar stuff. It was like reading comprehension. But I spent less time. I would say I spent 80% on GMAT, 20% on GRE. But I took both tests back to back. So I took November 13th, I took the GMAT. November 14th, I took the GRE. And it was a timing thing because of work. And I wanted to see like what my score was going to be. So instead of taking the GMAT multiple times, I wanted to do them together and see how I did. So the first time I got the GMAT 710 and I got a GRE of 324. And so right there, I was like, well, if I put more time in the GRE, my goal then was like, I want to get 330 and above, because that's what I was seeing with all the scores. And I was like, this seems like a more sensible path, but I can continue to study the GMAT. And if I think that I'm like at a 760 now, maybe I'll take the GMAT, because I think there's a bias towards the GMAT. But that's when I decided. So I think in terms of like deciding when to, my answer would be, initially, I would recommend people like give a shot to both tests, at least in practice, and look at it in a percentage-wise difference. So like if you study for a few weeks and you see your GREs already at the 315, 320 level, a 10% increase in that is a lot better, I think, percentile-wise than a GMAT, which is computer adaptive and a day-dependent thing in a little bit. So that's what my advice would be.
And from that moment, once you took both tests, Randeep, and got these scores, so the next opportunity you had, you took both of them again, or no? That time you took only the GRE.
So I'll tell you, I took the GMAT and I canceled the score. I took the GRE in April. So I was studying for the GMAT. I just prepared for it. So I was like, let's give it a shot and see, because I was kind of, I was okay with getting a 730 on the GMAT. I wasn't like shooting for the 760. As I prepared more, I was like 730 is probably like where I'm going to be at. And by the time I took that in February, I was like, I should be able to do this. And I had the first time I took the GMAT, I got a Q50 and a verbal 35. And what I know is that I was trying to get like a Q49 and a V40, because that's usually 730 to 750 range, depending on when you take the test. And I'd already gotten a Q50. So I was like, well, if I get my verbal up to 40, I'll be good. So I took this test. The verbal went well. I ended up getting a V39, and I got messed up in the testing center. And this is another thing I learned. I don't like the testing center. So I learned that I should take it at home, the test. I got messed up in the testing center. I started the math portion 2 minutes late. So I was like 2 minutes into the test. And you know how like once you're rushed, you can make mistakes. So I ended up getting a Q49 on that one. So that would have been my opportunity to probably get a Q50 again, and like a V39, that would have been a 730, and I would have ended my journey right there. But I canceled that score because it was exactly a 710. Because for some reason the Q49 and V39 was also 710. So I canceled that score and then I moved on to the GRE.
Got it. It's sometimes the black box of the GMAT, right? When you see like you have a higher score in each section, but your overall score keeps being the same. What's happening here? And so moving from this first test, that tests that you took like roughly at the same week, from the first GMAT and GRE, Randy. Did your strategy of study change, or no, you just kept going the same path?
No, it definitely changed. So once I took the test, I had some personal issues going on, and I ended up stopping studying between mid-November to January. So like in between that time, I was not really focusing as much on any of them. But when I came back, my strategy changed where I started doing a lot of vocabulary. So that was one. I kind of knew I was going to start focusing on the GRE. I found 2,000 words, the most used 2,000 words. There are like YouTube channels on that and all that. I didn't have any book or anything. I was like, I'm just going to memorize 2,000 words. And I had done language school as a special forces person. I had learned Arabic. I was like, if I can learn 40,000 words, I can learn 2,000 English words. So that was my mindset about that. So it's like, I'm going to memorize these words and see how I do. So one was I kind of switched from being a more quant heavy practice to a much more verbal heavy practice. And I also switched to the LSATs. So because I was aiming for a higher score or a very high score, I went to the LSAT because the LSAT has the hardest reading passages. And my strength was reading comprehension, but I wanted to be like 99th percentile on reading comprehension no matter what you gave me. So I went to LSAT, started doing LSAT, and there's a lot more material in the LSAT. And I started taking LSAT reading comprehension tests. So I would take, I think the test is actually 40 minutes. I got this from GMAT Ninja actually. I didn't care about the time. I didn't do 40 minutes. I was like, let's do the LSAT reading comprehension in 50 minutes. And that was my strategy. I did a lot of reading comprehension like that. And I did critical reasoning in the LSAT as well, which helped the GMAT stuff. It helped everything. So I, in a way, kind of moved away from some of the GMAT and the GRE materials to go to this LSAT. And the math kind of fell behind a little bit, but I was doing the GRE anyway. So I felt pretty good because I was getting like 168, 170 on the tests for the math.
So it was not really as math heavy as the GMAT, and you could keep going on this LSAT and this other material.
Yep.
And one thing that you said, and it's very interesting, Randeep, and I would like to ask you about it. So when you were practicing, did you focus a lot on time management? So for example, getting over each question in, let's say, 2.5 minutes, or in general, you wouldn't really worry about that?
I would say there was a period when I started where I didn't worry about time at all. Then there was a period when I started doing like mock tests and started to see like, hey, I don't finish these sections in time. Then I started getting worried, and I started focusing on like improving my speed. I would say that was a bad strategy. That actually pushed me back. I would say because typically what I have learned doing GMAT and GRE, the reason you're taking time is because chances are you don't know the concept and you're wasting time figuring out what concept to apply or what framework to apply. And so later on in like February, I started spending more time with the GMAT Ninja and LSAT, and I started to see what concept and framework do I need to apply, and my timing improved. So I did a lot of reps, and I had like the question bank from GMAT Club. I started using that, and I just did reps without worrying about the time. I just would like record the time and take a look at what was, and it went down slowly.
No, I get it. And one last question about the GMAT before we transition to the school research and essay crafting part of your journey, Randeep. And you all, please feel free to keep sending questions. Also, remember to subscribe to the channel, like the video. I bet Randeep's gonna be very happy with that. Otherwise, he won't come back anymore. He won't want to be back, And one thing is about the error log. So did you make one? And if so, was it important for you?
I did use an error log for sentence corrections. That is one place where I applied the error log. It was very helpful in the sentence corrections. Reading comprehension, I didn't use it. One, because I was already starting at a higher level. And two, it was just long to write the error log for reading comprehension. The math, I used error logs for 3 areas that I was weak at. So I feel like if you're weak and below 50 percentile or 60 percentile on something, the error log is I would recommend it. I used the GMAT Club when I used the GMAT Club package on like the tried questions, it was automatically seeing what questions I got wrong. So I had a database of things, and I was like writing a reason in a notebook. So I had that. The math part, I was saying the 3 weak areas, I had probability was one of the areas for me. and then like initially word problems, and I used error logs in that.
Oh, and we did get another question regarding that as well. So, what were the most helpful resources for you, Randeep, during your study journey for the GMAT
I would
and
say
GRE, of course?
I'll break it down in this way. I would say conceptual understanding and just pure training in concepts would be GMAT Ninja. I would recommend his YouTube channel. I'm not getting paid by him. Like, I think he does a great job. I would say for question bank, you can't go wrong with the official questions, but you just can't start using them initially. Like, I would say, like, learn all the concepts and then go to that question bank, and you can buy. It's actually quite a lot of questions if you like do it right. You can use that all the way to the end. I didn't follow my own advice. I ran out of the questions initially, but that's why I say do it that way. And then the third part would be finding practice materials that are outside. I would highly recommend LSAT. If you're shooting for like a 750 on the GMAT or a 330 plus on the GRE, I think like the LSAT is a huge tool, and there are so many tests available that you can never run out of LSAT material. Yeah, that's how I would rank them.
Perfect. I really wish I had talked to you before I took my own GMAT, but it's too late. No, when I talk to people about the GMAT, they are already like mentioning the new GMAT and some DI questions. And when you try to pretend you understand, but you're like,
yeah, whatever.
I have no idea what this is about.
So yeah, we're like 3 hours of concentration.
Exactly what I think. And just like sitting down that test center, like you said, all the stress that comes for you to be in that environment, it's not a nice place to be, right? And I do remember, to your point, so your last tests, Randeep, were all online?
Yes, so I did it at home. My last test was in April, the GRE, and I did it at home, and that was the best experience. I was able to lock everything, and like it was quiet, didn't have to worry about anything. Yeah, it was great.
Love it. And I know that some people had that same experience as me. I remember going through the GMAT. I took the GMAT only, and my screen just froze, and I was for like seriously maybe 30 minutes just waving to the screen, waiting for a proctor to come, and no one would come. When you just start sweating.
Yeah. I'm sorry about that. Happened to me actually. So like when I started the GRE at home, I had the screen connected to my computer, and in the instructions it was kind of vague. So I was like, "What screen is connected? How can that be cheating?" And they see the setup, and they're like, "Yeah, sir, like your screen can't work on this," and that moved everything around, and then, like I had to change my computer pretty much. And so I started the test like 30 minutes later because I was moving through all this technical stuff. So that kind of raised my heart rate, but I was like, let's just calm down. And I started with math, which is probably why I didn't get a perfect score, because I probably like
there's so many factors right involved on that go well beyond have you prepared well and everything that concerns to your prep itself.
Yeah.
And we also got one question, Randeep, from Sarah. I'm seeing your question as well, Amit, about the overall journey. We're gonna ask it to Randeep later on our conversation, but from Sarah regarding the test journey and experience itself, what would you say, Randeep, that were some ways that you relaxed or decompressed after studying or before after taking the tests?
Yeah, I really enjoyed taking walks. So I would like break my study sessions down even to 30 minutes. Even during studying, I would get up and walk for 10 minutes. So in my work, sometimes I was not getting a lot. It was not sometimes indoors. And so like I really appreciate getting some sunlight and like getting some fresh air. That was really helpful for me. Being able to walk. I have a dog, and so we would go out and like just relax, listen to music. And something else I started doing before the tests was I actually tried getting like a 30-minute meditation or a hypnosis. Like there's things like that on YouTube where they're like basically self affirmations to be like, you're going to be fine and all that. It's kind of cheesy, but I used it, and it gets your heart rate down. Like my goal was to get the heart rate down to like 55 before taking the test. And I think that helps the clarity of mind. So I was doing that, and I would always take these walks, and I would never study more than 2 hours without like taking a 20, 30-minute break.
And just to clarify this meditation aspect, because I think it's really, really interesting, did you do it before your official tests as well, or just during your study journey, Randy?
Yeah, so I did a bunch of mock tests like every weekend after the January. So
Mhm.
like I followed the same routine for the official test as well as the mocks. So before the
Mm.
mocks, I would wake up. I did it exactly the same time, so it was very choreographed. And I would wake up about 2 hours before the test, go for a walk, and then kind of
Mhm.
do a meditation, and then solve a few problems to get the mind running, and then go for another walk, and then start the test. And doing it at home helped me keep that same routine. So that's how I did it.
Mhm. Love it. Thank you so much for sharing all those tips, Randeep. And just as we transition to the next part of your journey, any aspect of your study path for GMAT GRE you think we didn't touch? Anything you would like to say to people watching us? Any like advice on that?
I think we covered. I think the biggest takeaway for me is give yourself time. Like
Mhm.
if you have a growth mindset, I think the test score anyone can achieve the score. It's about giving yourself the time and like finding the right resource, like being objective about your weakness and like really tackling it. Don't just get stuck on like the strength and keep pushing it. Find that weakness and like really tackle it.
Perfect. And once you had this score, you had your target score, and it was time for you to apply for the
Yep.
schools, for your target schools. I
Yep.
know you said at the beginning of your journey, of your MBA journey, Randy, you were already doing some research on them, but how did you decide which schools you were going to apply for? So you had the score you would like to have. So now what?
So once I got the score, it opened up the schools because now it wasn't like a theoretical thing. I had engineering background. My GPA was above the averages for those all the schools in the business school arena. So I was like, okay, from a statistics standpoint, I'm good now. Now I really started focusing on the fit and the industry I wanted to go in. So coming from a military background, and this may not be true for people coming from the private sector, they may have a very defined idea of what they want to do. For me, I was initially always focused on early decision Columbia. And I actually, to a certain degree, that helped me because I started writing the essay for Columbia. I think they released it in like May. And I used the previous year's prompts to start like brainstorming those prompts. And like the question for Columbia is, what's your post MBA goals? And then why is Columbia a good fit for you? I think those are two. And the third one is give us a time where you like led a team. Those are three very basic questions which apply to all the business schools, but having had decided like kind of allowed me to be like, I know kind of where I want to go. Let's start writing this and see what happens. Now when I started writing those three essay prompts, I was like, I really don't know if I have an authentic answer, a real answer true to myself about what are my post MBA goals that I want to like describe and write in a cohesive way. So for me, it was a journey, it was curiosity. So I started reaching out to, and this is hard in some cases and it might be easy in some cases in the private sector. I reached out to veterans who went to these top business programs and they were very gracious with their time. And I would call them and like do cold calls like LinkedIn. I would be like, hey, I'm applying to business school. I see that you were a veteran and now you're doing consulting. Can you tell me like your experience at the school? Can you tell me how the school has helped you go into this area? Same thing with investment banking. I found a few folks who did that. And all the big areas I kind of reached out to. And the energy sector, I reached out to professionals in the energy sector and I kind of got their thoughts about it. And I kind of meditated on those thoughts between April to June. It was all about like, what is a vision for the career? And not from standpoint, oh, this will get me into the school. It was like, what do I really want to do too? And that really helped. So that was the first part of the introspective exercise.
So it would be basically the first part. Would you say you were not really focused on any specific schools questions or specific essays, but more on these general aspects? So you could be real to yourself about what you wanted and really just once you had these answers, reflect them on paper.
Yep. Yep. That's a
Perfect.
good summary. Yep. And I can
Mhm.
move to the next step. So like once I had that, I have the advantage that I'm in the US. And at this point, I had some flexibility at work to say, because I had my wife and I had to decide, like, where do we want to really go? So, like, it's cool. It's one thing to say, like, I want to go to Columbia, New York, and it's a great school. But it's also like, well, she has to move and it's her career. And, like, does it all make sense? So we decided to go to the schools. So like generally speaking, I kind of thought of like, okay, this school is highly ranked, whatever, but does it fit like from a living standpoint and being there and all that? Let's go and check it out. So we went to Columbia. We went to Booth, and that was like the initial part. That helped us get some more understanding of like what does it really feel like, and a little more introspection on that aspect too, of like what does the environment look like. And then we did a trip to California. So I was not even considering Stanford or California at all. This was all from the dialogue with my wife, where she was like, where do I want to be in life as well? And she was like, well, let's go and explore California. And that's how the next few schools came up.
Mm-hmm. So this second part, from what I heard, you think was really helpful for you both, you and your wife, to diagnose where you would like to be, right, Randeep? Just going out there and visiting the schools, not only to hear from them, from these current students and alumni, but also feeling how the environment was.
Yep.
And once you had these data points, what was your next step in this decision process?
Yep. So we came back from California about mid-June, end of June. We did this trip to California. I went to Berkeley. I went to Stanford. And one thing that came up was like energy, clean energy of all the states, because we drove through California. The one thing that was very clear to me is that the state that's actually doing a lot of things with clean energy is California. You see the solar farms, you see the wind farms, you see like people coming up with these technologies there. And so it's like, why not be in a state that's so focused on getting to 100% clean energy? That would be a good place to probably learn about clean energy. And then we went to Stanford and also realized that there is a much heavier entrepreneurial spirit in Stanford. And not to say anything bad about any of the other schools, there are certain tracks, and there's tracks of very legitimate, like consulting, IB. Those are like honestly the big tracks in all the big business schools. Like 50 to 60% people are going to end up in those areas. And so the question then becomes like, do you want to be in those areas? And like through that introspection, I was like, well, consulting, boutique energy may be a thing, but at my age and my situation in life, maybe going in and competing with someone who's 27 years old who can travel all over the world is not the best fit for me. And I'm probably going to get burnt out or not eventually like it. And so it also became, okay, if I'm not going down these two major tracks necessarily, what kind of school do I want to go? And so that was a data point that eventually led me to kind of now focus on the schools that I wanted to go to. So end of June, it was the California schools and the two schools we mentioned before.
In having that on your hands, so having the schools you would like to apply, having this introspection that you did in these months, what was the next step in putting them into the essays, in really using all of this package of knowledge you obtained throughout these months to really communicate all of that to the schools?
So one thing I'll say here, Fernando, is like, here is where I think asking for help and bringing in people who know you well enough to get feedback, because you can't really tell your story and know how it reads and feels, or if it's missing something, without getting feedback from people. So I started enlisting a bunch of my friends from the military, my wife, people who kind of knew me, and people I didn't even know, sometimes cold calling like alumni or veterans in these schools. And they were all very open to it. That's the crazy thing, is like, if you can make a genuine connection and show that, hey, I'm really interested in this, people will help you. And I had like a team of like 10 people, I would say, like that I kind of enlisted and like ran ideas through. And the first essay that I really started to work on was the Stanford essay. So end of June, the prompt was out. It doesn't ever change. It's what matters most to you and why. And that prompt is I think the most general one, but it gave me the basis for everything else. Because if I could describe what matters most to me and why, and then I also kind of understood how my 2 to 5 year plan was going to be for career-wise, then I was pretty much good for all the schools. So I started off with Stanford end of June with what matters most why, and I kept working on it till September.
Nice. So something really interesting that you mentioned, Randeep, about this essay crafting, and I think a lot of introspection probably went into that one question as well: what matters the most to you? And you mentioned meditating about these subjects. So would you have any advice for people to put that into practice? People, I mean, anxious people like
Yeah.
me who have a very hard time meditating on stuff.
I would say that like I have the same thing. Like I have a hard time sitting still. I would say like a couple of things for like essay writing and in general, like just kind of easing into this meditation where you're like, hey, I'm a productive person. I don't want to just sit around in the house and like think about stuff. Like, what is that? I would say one would be journaling because your hand is moving. So you're writing your thoughts in the morning. My wife does that, and so it's her idea. So I have to give her credit for this. But like I think a lot of folks who've gotten into Stanford and try to answer that what matters most to me, why did a lot of journaling and didn't worry about like writing what matters most to them. They just were like what comes up, and then they aggregated everything. So I was journaling as one. I didn't do journaling. I just looked at the prompt and I wrote stuff, but I didn't do journaling. I would say that was one way. I would say yoga is another way. Like it's an actual physical activity, so you're doing something, so you don't need to. But it does the same effect because it kind of puts you in these postures to breathe and kind of focus on the movement. And then I think like anything can be meditating if you enjoy it a lot. If you can kind of go into a meditative state, whether it's music, different things for different people. But I think that's another way to kind of get your mind into that area.
Really achieving that state of flow where you can just think about what you want to think and have pleasure on that. And since you mentioned it being the journaling idea being from your iPhone, I always tell people around here, I already tell them like at least 50% of the ideas I tell you come from my wife. They are not originally mine. And it got to the point where every time someone invites me to do anything, they write in the email, bring Marina, who it's my wife's name. So I told them they don't even care if I'm going. They want her to go and they invite me because like I'm her husband. But I understand. I would do that as well. So regarding this essay journey, Randeep, and just a quick reminder to everyone, please feel free to keep your questions coming. And remember to subscribe to the channel and also like this video. It helps GMAT Club a lot. One question we got from Amit is, he said, good job, Randeep. And what was the total length of your journey, including all the ups and downs?
So August 2022, I would say I ended doing all my work as far as like writing essays and things first week of September. I was never in a rush. I got all the essays done like a couple of weeks early, first week of September. So that's like the initial part. And then honestly, because I'd done so much questioning the alumni and students, the interview part was the easiest part. Like once those interviews came, I would do some research, but like generally like the essays were very authentic to what I wanted to do in the school. I treated all the schools as my first choice. And so like, it was very easy for me to get into that interview process. So like really first week of September, so a whole year.
This is even something I would love to ask you, Randeep. So once you went out there, you wrote down all your essays and you got the response from the schools, did you get any specific preparation for the interviews, or you thought you had the main answers already with you?
So I did this. Once I had submitted the application, I started going to GMAT Club and Clear Admit, and they have a lot of past interview questions. So that gave me an understanding of like, okay, these are the questions they're asking. It turned out, I didn't know this, but it turned out that by writing those essays, a lot of that stuff was already answered. A few specific things that because of space limitations, people as they work on their applications will see the word limits are ridiculous to write this stuff. So in a way, I saw it as an advantage. I was like, I did so much research. I couldn't put it into the essay because it's like 500 words. Now I have the ability to speak to someone. So I need to come up with a clear, concise way to list those things. And so I worked a little bit making outlines, and then I did some mock interviews with school-specific folks. So like for Columbia, I did it with the Columbia people, and like Stanford, I did it with a few Stanford people. I did like a couple of mocks, and then I did the interview. Like I did a couple of mocks prior to the interview.
So the approach, would you say, changed slightly? Because for the essays, you got people even who were not from the school's family and friends to read your essays because they know you, but
Yeah,
for the interviews, you got people from the schools because they had lived
exactly.
this experience already. So this would you say was one difference?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Mm. And I believe it was really, really nice that you mentioned this support network, not only when you started studying, but also to read the essays and give you feedback. Because I feel that many people try to get only, let's say, other students, other alumni to read their essays when, as you mentioned, people who really know you, right, are from your family and friends.
Yeah.
So it's really nice that you
Yeah.
mentioned that. And so going to the interviews, Randeep, would you follow the same meditation journey and aspect as for the tests? Would you have any routine previous to these interviews to calm you down? Or what was your process on
Yeah.
that?
So for the interview, it was a little different. So the interview, I did one in-person interview for University of Chicago. I went to Chicago. The rest of them were all online at home. For each one was a little different because the time zones and all that, I couldn't come up with the exact routine, but I'll tell you the two commonalities. What I was doing was I would find out the interviewer a couple of days prior. I would do research on the interviewer a little bit, and not in like so just to understand the industry they were in, just kind of prepare myself to ask some good questions to them from that standpoint. And then the other thing I was doing, common across the board, was going on a walk with my wife and like just running through not an interview, but a story basically. The story at this another thing is like the idea of repetition is really huge because by the time you get to the interview, it's very natural, and then people don't sense that you're being fake about it. And maybe you don't have like a grand scheme for 5 years, but if you've repeated it 100 times, it comes off as like a good story and a realistic story.
It's the old and gold many times, right? Fake it until you make it, until you yourself believe it, and people also
Exactly.
start believing
Yeah.
it. And would you say, Randeep, that there was there were maybe any specific points of your application that really made you stand out? And I say here, not only for Stanford, which is the most competitive, but for all the schools you applied for.
I would say like what I realized is a lot of times people are not doing as much research on the school. And
Mhm.
I think the biggest pitfall is sometimes like folks put so much effort on their first choice that they kind of it's evident from the application that you're kind of thinking of the other school as a second choice. So during the interview, like they haven't done their homework. I think like most likely application will stand out if you can call out specific things in the program that match up with your goal, and it's like very clear that you like went into this and you even talked to the professor. I think I was able to do that in every single application from like why, for example, why Haas or why Stanford. I had a very specific person or course and things like that listed in my essays. I think that helped the essay stand out. And I think the second part would be what made it stand out is being able to see what the values of the school are. So, like, I'll talk of Haas and Stanford kind of challenging things and change the world and all that, change organizations. So, there's like a disruptive nature. Finding things in your career that kind of resonate to that ideal of like changing the world and changing organizations. I think if you can kind of link the stories together, I think I was probably able to do that reasonably well, which probably made this application stand out too.
Nice. And that absolutely makes a lot of sense. From what I'm hearing, it was basically getting all the package that you got from the introspection and making them specific to the values of the school and to what they offered regarding your journey moving forward.
Yep.
Nice. And one question that we just got from Dunduis. I'm sorry, Dunduis, if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. Feel free to correct me on the chat. So awesome stuff. Congrats. And I was wondering, what are some tips that you could give us when it comes to networking and approaching and going through the informational interviews you said you had?
Yeah. I would say one, expect a high failure rate that you may not get a response back. If you expect it, you won't be disappointed. Two, have like a certain message which kind of brings them in. Like do a little bit of research on them and ask them a specific question. I think Business school students are very busy networking themselves, and they've done it themselves. So they are actually pretty empathetic to your attempt at networking because they've been on the other end and are on the other end of it. But they do need a specific question. They don't want to waste their time and be like, tell me how to get in. Like, no one, people who are in business school, they'll probably tell you, like, they don't have that. They can just kind of give you, like, do you have a specific question for me? Like, if you're an energy guy, they can probably tell you an energy thing, or finance guy, finance thing. I think that was helpful for me. It was like finding out, like, what part. One person cannot answer everything about your application. So I would find people on specific aspects and really focus on that. And like sometimes I would get a response, sometimes I would not. But I would also recommend reaching out to your affinity groups. So affinity groups being, if you can reach out, like the Brazilian club in like some university, or the Indian association, or the military club, or the finance club if you like have connections, or consulting club if you're already a McKinsey person or something like it. It'll help because then you have one additional connection in some way to this person to speak to. If you just cold call some person who's in a completely different industry, chances are they're not going to respond.
Absolutely. Even because, as you said, time is very limited, right? So, and any final thoughts on this aspect of your journey, Randeep? Any final tips that you would give to people regarding their essay crafting and interviews themselves?
And Fernando, I have time. If there's some more questions, I can answer that. There's no rush.
Sure.
So the final comments I would say, as far as the interview and like essay prep, is make sure you give yourself time. And like, I would say 3 to 4 months. It is not like writing a essay for a college course. This is going to be a lot more than that, and expect a lot of feedback. Like, write at least 5 drafts, like I would say. Because the ideas might change and the structure might change altogether. That's one. And I think the second one would be like, don't create a model that you think the school wants to hear. That I think will always fail, because these guys read these essays a lot and they can sniff out if you're just like saying it to say it. And I think that's a big pitfall for folks. I would say the third thing is, don't submit applications to too many schools just because you want to get a yes from a school. I know it's going to be a stressful process, but I would say like focus on 3 or 4 applications, schools that you really want to go to, and try to go to round 1, and just remove the worry of like, is my chance better in round 1 or round 2? Like, just go to round 1, and then like if you have more time or it didn't work out, you go to round 2.
And I didn't want to tell you that, Randy, but now that you're already organizing things in lists of 3, you just have to go to consulting. I know it myself. Once you start doing it, you're there already. You just can't avoid it. You can prevent. And so one last question that I do have, that's from myself, because you said you learned Arabic while you're in the military. Any tips for people who love learning new languages, myself included on that?
Yeah, I think I think it's a learning style. Like, so me, I grew up in India where the education system is very like, they'll speak to you. They're like, just listen. So for me, auditory style is good for me. So for me, I listen. I usually put myself in situations where I'm like absorbed by it. So like even the GRE words, the Arabic, I would just play it in my car and like have word lists and learn that like through just listening to it. But if you're a visual learner, then it might be like cards, like making cards and things like that. And I really enjoy, I think speaking language and comprehending language are 2 different parts. Usually comprehending language is easier than speaking it. And I think the best way to do the speaking is like, just put yourself in the situation where there's no choice. Like, there's no English for you to like try. The person doesn't speak anything else. And that helped like in my situations in deployment. Like, I was talking to people who didn't speak English or anything else. So it was like, this is how you have to talk to them.
And that's exactly the advice. I was reading these past few days, one of Adam Grant's books, and he says exactly that many people wait for them to be ready before putting like themselves out there in the arena. But the way you are gonna be ready is exactly what you said, by going out there, making mistakes, and learning from them. Well, Dhanyavad for this piece of advice. And do you speak Hindi, Randeep?
I do speak Hindi.
I just know some lines. People watching here are probably sick of me saying the same lines every time that someone who speaks Hindi comes in. Like, मेरा नाम Fernando है, ओ मैं दर्द में पड़ता हूँ, मैं ब्राजील से हूँ, लेकिन मैं USA में रहता है.
Who? No.
Who?
बहुत अच्छा बोला. बहुत
I
बढ़िया,
hate
बहुत
this.
बढ़िया. No, you spoke
This
really
who,
well.
this who have thing. And the last part of my pitch, as of now, is Mujhe Kute or Gumna Pasand hai, that I like dogs and traveling. Let's see. Let's see. I hope.
No, that's a great. That's great. Like, you're really good.
Thank you. Bohat Dhanyavad. And you see, just not only people watching here already sick of that, as my wife, I just saw it on my Apple Watch here. She sent me like some messages laughing and saying, you are telling your pitch in Hindi again. So even she knows that. But thank
Do you read it too, or are you writing it in English and speaking, like practicing it in like English transliteration?
What? Sorry, I'm sorry.
Or for Hindi, have you learned how to like read it also, or are you like writing it?
No, I'm just no, not yet, at least, because I even thought about that, but I said, maybe later.
No, that's awesome.
But,
so you speak Portuguese, I imagine. Portuguese, English, Hindi.
Yes,
learning and
Hindi, just like these few words, and also some Spanish and French. So I do
Nice.
love learning new languages. I mean, I think you can tell yourself, right, Randeep? It's one thing when you go someplace and you just like, you can use Google Translate and stuff, but it's another thing when you can really interact with people and show you understand their culture and be in touch with them, right?
Yep. No, it's amazing. It's a great way to build connection and also understand the world too in a different way. The language is look at the world in a different way too.
Love it. Hope I can improve my Hindi in the next few months.
Yeah, please reach out if you want to practice Hindi. Just reach out to me.
Don't offer it because I will reach out.
That's fine.
Thank you so much, Randy, for your time, for all your advice, your tips, and hope to see you. I do not hope, I know I will see you a few years down the road as the CEO of a new booming clean energy company. Just like, it's going to come on the Morning Brew newsletter. Randy, the CEO of a company who is doing their IPO right now. And I said,
I appreciate it. Thank you. I didn't get to ask, like, what area are you planning to go into post MBA?
Yeah, so I'm a lawyer by training. I worked for the government in Brazil, and post MBA, I'm transitioning to consulting. I'm going to be in Charlotte working with strategy consulting.
Awesome. Yeah, I might reach out to you to kind of learn that jargon and all that. That's an interesting area to be in.
Absolutely. Anything you need, please feel free to count on me, Randeep. Thank you so much once again. Thank you, everyone watching us. I know it's already late in some places, really early in some others. So thank you all for the audience once again, and see you all soon.
See you. Good luck to everyone.
Bye, everyone.